Welcome to Finding Holiness, where we delve into timeless Torah wisdom, revealing the sacred in everyday moments. Join us on a journey to elevate your spirituality and discover holiness in every aspect of life. I'm your host, Rabbi David Kadosh, and together, let's embark on a path of spiritual exploration. I hope you enjoy this next episode. Erev Tov, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Thursday night Parashat HaShavua class. Glad you can join us here this evening on a snowy, cold, icy winter night in Canada. And those listening on our podcast, findingholiness.com, thank you very much. It is nice to see everyone. And if you're listening, Bruchim Habayim, go check out our podcast. Wonderful things, wonderful Divrei Torah, archived, and in a way that is beautiful for everyone to search for whatever they're looking for. Thank God we have a lot of great Torah out there for you to explore. Tonight is Parashat Tisa, or should I say this week's Parashat is Parashat Tisa, and that is what we will be discussing this evening with your permission. And we have a fantastic class for you. Buckle your seatbelts because it's a beauty. This week's Parashat Tisa, we learn about the mitzvah of Mahatzit HaShekel, the half coin that was donated by every single Jew. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, Ki tisa et rosh bnei Yisrael ifkudehem. When you take a census of bnei Yisrael according to their counts, v'natenu ish kofer nafsho ladonai bifkodotam. Every man shall give Hashem an atonement for his soul when counting them. V'lo yeh bahem negev bifkodotam, and there will be no plague among them when counting them. Ze yitenu kol ha'over al hapikodim. This is what they shall give everyone who passes among the counted. Mahatzit shekel b'shekel hakodesh, half of the shekel by the holy shekel. Esrim gera hashekel, the shekel is 20 gera. Mahatzit shekel teruma l'Adonai, half of a shekel as a portion to Hashem. This is the opening passage in our parasha this week. Chachamim tell us through Ruach HaKodesh, Kadosh Baruch Hu commanded Bnei Israel to donate the Mahatzit shekel as an atonement for the golden calf. The Mahatzit shekel was a kapara for the golden calf. The Gemara Masechet Shekalim, the Yerushalmi writes, "Zaytenu kol ha'over al hapikudim, lefi shechat'u b'mahatzit hayom, yitenu mahatzit shekel." Because the Jewish people sinned with the first half of the day, halfway through the day, thinking that Moshe wasn't coming back, so they have to give half a shekel. That's the opinion of the Tanna Kama. One reason why they give the half a shekel. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, "Lefi she'avru al aseret dibrot," because they transgressed aseret dibrot, the 10 commandments. Yiyeh noten kol echad ve'echad asara gera. So therefore, each person has to give 10 gera. Again, each shekel was 20 gera. So if you're giving half, it equals 10. 10 corresponding to the 10 commandments. It is well known that the terrible sin of the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf, it taints us, it haunts us every single day. The parasha tells us this week that after HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds to Moshe's plea to forgive the Jewish people for the golden calf, he says, "Ve'ata," and now, "Lech nechet am," go and lead the people, "El asher dibarti lach," that which I've spoken to you. "Hineh malachi yelech lefanecha," behold, my angel shall go before you. "Uvyom pokti upakati alehem et chatatam." On the day that I make an accounting, I shall bring their sin to account against him. And Rashi here says a very, very powerful message about Hashem's laying down punishment on Klal Yisrael. Tamid keshe'efkod alehem avonotehem. God says, always, when I make an accounting of the Jewish people's sins, upakati alehem me'at min ha'avon hazeh im shar avonot, I will always hold them accountable to some small degree for this sin of the golden calf among the other sins. Ve'en puranut ba'al Yisrael, there is no punishment that comes to the Jewish people She'en ba ksat mipir'on avon ha'egel, that does not have some retribution of the sin of the egel, of the golden calf. So this is a huge Rashi, because this answers a lot of questions, especially some people that wonder, I don't understand, I did something so small, why do I get punished so badly? You don't know that every punishment that you receive, there's one small element and aspect of the Chet HaEgel connected to it. That's the reason why we receive punishment, as we're going to go on to explain. So every generation, we are held accountable for the Chet HaEgel, along with the other transgressions, and we have to consider the following. In these times where we don't have machatzita shekel, we said the machatzita shekel was to be mechaper, the golden calf. So how can we make amends? How can we fix and rectify this sin if we don't have the machatzita shekel? So the simple answer is, just study about the machatzita shekel. Just by reading the Torah and the commentary about the machatzita shekel, it's as if we fulfilled the mitzvah. Unshalema parim sefatenu. Let our lips substitute for the bulls. It's in reference to korbanot. We don't have korbanot anymore, so instead we say tefillah. We read the korbanot in the morning. The Gemara tells us in Menachot, kol ha'osek bechatat, betorat chatat, keilu ikriv chatat. Anybody who engages in the study of the korban chatat, it's as if he brought a korban chatat. Anyone who studies the Torah of Asham, the laws of the Korban Asham, it's as if he brought a Korban Asham. So, at a simple level, just studying about Machatzita Shekel is a very, very good idea to help remove and rectify the sin of the Chet HaEgel. Any mitzvah which cannot actually be performed, we can also fulfill in thought. So, the meaning and the reasons of the mitzvah need to be explored, they need to be investigated, and by doing so, it's as if we actually perform the mitzvah. So it's very much incumbent upon us tonight to explore the reason for the mitzvah machatzita shekel. Why does it serve as an atonement for the Chet HaEgel? And by understanding that lesson, that purpose of the mitzvah, we will succeed in kiviyachol atoning for this sin as best as we can. So we begin tonight. I told you to buckle up. We begin tonight with the enlightening words of the great Chidushei Harim. And he looks at the opening pasuk, Ki Tisa Bnei Israel. When you count the heads of Bnei Israel, and he says that this pasuk, Ki Tisa Bnei Israel, Ki Tisat Rosh Bnei Israel, is a hint to Shabbat Kodesh. And he writes, Ki Tisat Rosh Bnei Israel, Haya lo lichtov Rashe. The pasuk should have wrote the word Rashe, which means heads in plural, when you count the heads of Bnei Israel, but it doesn't. It writes the word Rosh, head in singular. Ulam nesiut Rosh hu Shabbat. But the raising of the head is in essence Shabbat. Shekol ot mitnaseh leot shel mala mimenu, because every letter carries a letter that is on top of it. ובשבת נעשים כל הרצונות של ישראל אחד רק לרצון השם יתברך שמאחדים ברזה דאחד. When each letter of the word Rosh is elevated to the letter that comes after it, the letter that comes after Reish is Shin, the letter that comes after Aleph is Bet, and the letter that comes after Shin is Taf, spelled Shabbat. You get Shabbat. On Shabbat, all of the aspirations and desires of Klal Yisrael become one, he says, solely trying to fulfill Hashem's will. They unite. They unite in the mystery of one. Shabbat Kodesh, all of Bnei Israel are able to unite with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The mystery of Shabbat is exactly that. On Shabbat, everything is united. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu alludes to this when he speaks to Moshe, Ki tisa et rosh Bnei Israel. In other words, if you wish to elevate Bnei Israel, Ki tisa et rosh Bnei Israel, connect them with the Shabbat, which is alluded to Ki tisa et rosh. When you lift the rosh to the letters above it, you get Shabbat. Not only that, you actually see how Shabbat is alluded to in the Machatzita Shekel. Ki Tisat Rosh Bnei Israel, the continuation of the pasuk is Zeitenu kol ha'over al ha'pekudim machatzit ha'shekel b'shekel ha'kodesh. You want to know, you want to count, you want to raise the heads of Bnei Israel, have each one give a machatzit ha'shekel. Says the Chachamim, Sheshet yamim ya'aseh melacha, ubayom ha'shevi'i shabbat shabbaton kodesh l'Hashem. In the same parasha of Ki Tisa, later on, right at the end of Rishon, it talks about the commandment to work for 6 days, and the 7th day is a day of complete rest. And if you take the word Shabbaton Kodesh L'Hashem, the first letter of Shabbaton Kodesh L'Hashem spells out shekel. Shekel. Mahatzita shekel. On Shabbat, half of our pleasure comes from earthly delights, the food, the drink, and half comes from spiritual activities. And therefore, Shabbat is Chetzio Lachem, Chetzio Lashem. It's half for us and half for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu derives pleasure on Shabbat even from the half that comes from the earthly mundane delights. And that earthly half is the Machatzit HaShekel, and that constitutes some of the sanctity of Shabbat, Shabbaton Kodesh Lashem. Shekel. So we see that the mitzvah Machatzit HaShekel alludes to Shabbat Kodesh. We also learned that Machatzit HaShekel provides atonement for the Chet HaEgel. So it turns out that the Shabbat also atones for the Chet HaEgel. The Gemara Masechet Shabbat says, Kol HaMeshamer Shabbat Keilchato, anybody who observes Shabbat with all its halachot, Afilu Oved Avodah Zarah Kedor Enosh Mohalin Lo. Even if he worshipped idolatry, like the generation of Enosh, Mohalin Lo, they forgive him, if he keeps Shabbat properly. What's the reason? Avodah Zarah, idolatry, it constitutes heresy, a denial of God. Shabbat is the exact opposite. Shabbat is the affirmation of our emunah, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in 6 days and rests on the 7th. So when I observe Shabbat, I demonstrate that emunah, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. And that serves as an atonement for idolatry, which is associated with the Chet HaEgel. This is one of the reasons why Shabbat is mentioned as a prelude to the story of the Chet HaEgel in this week's parasha. Achet Shabbatotai Tishmoru. Just observe the Shabbatot. Ki oti beni ubenechem ledorotechem adat ki aneshem mekadishchem. It's a sign between me and you for your generations. And then, of course, v'shameru bnei Yisrael et Shabbat la'asot Shabbat rotam berit olam. The famous passage that we recite during our Shmona Esrei, during Shabbat, our Kiddush on Shabbat as well. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wished to place the remedy before the ailment. By observing Shabbat, we mentioned Shabbat first in this week's parasha, and by observing Shabbat, what happens? We merit the atonement for the Chet HaEgel. And these pesukim tie in beautifully with the opening of the parasha Ki Tisat Rosh Bnei Israel, which we said is also an allusion for Shabbat Kodesh, the mitzvah Machatzit HaShekel, all to atone for the Chet HaEgel. Okay, this is great. Baruch Hashem, nice little connection. But we're going to go a little bit deeper. Again, for those who's joining us, Baruchim Abayim. I've forewarned our listeners tonight that we're going to go very, very deep and to grab on, because it's going to be wonderful, wonderful Chidushim. The Mekubalim explain an unbelievable Chidush with regards to the shape and the image of this calf that was made with the gold of Bnei Israel. The Rama Mipano writes, Amru ala ba'agada, they stated in the Agada, shemechetzio klapei rosho, haya ketovnit shor ochel esev, that the upper half of this animal that came out resembled an ox eating grass. Uklape znavo haya hamor, and towards its tail, the lower half, was something that resembled a donkey. Vehen shte midot biklipa. And this represents the two elements of the klipa, the negative forces. Ve'al kil'aim ze amru ele Elohecha Yisrael. And regarding this unholy, improper union, that's when Bnei Israel proclaimed, Ele Elohecha Yisrael, these are your God, Yisrael. So this is the teaching of the Rama Mipano. And hence the name of tonight's shiur, the title of tonight's shiur, half ox, half donkey. I want to lead you through the words of the Megale Amukot that is taught to us by Rabbi Pinchas Friedman, and because he says something really, really unbelievable here. The Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Nun Tet Amud Bet, discusses the fact that the legs of the original Nahash, the Nahash HaKadmoni, the snake of Adam and Chava, were amputated after Adam and Chava sinned by partaking of the Etz Hadat. And there on that Gemara, there is an unreal statement in a Beraita by a rabbi named Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya. This is what he writes. Haval al shamash gadol she'avad min ha'olam. It's unfortunate that a great servant was lost from the world. This is in reference to this snake. She'ilmale nitkalel nahash. For had the serpent not been cursed, kol echad ve'echad miYisrael hayu mizdamnin lo shene nechashim tovim. Each and every one of Israel, every Jew, would have had two good serpents as servants. Echad mishigro letzafon, ve'echad mishigro ledarom. One he would send to the north. One serpent servant would be sent to the north. Echad mishagero ladarom, and one of them would be sent to the south. Why? Le'avi lo sandlovonim tovim v'avanim tovot u'margaliot. He would bring him gems, stones, precious stones, and pearls. V'lo od, not only that, ela shemafshilin retzua tachat zenavo u'motzi ba'afar leginato urchurvato. It would have been possible to attach a strap beneath its tail and have it take out soil to his garden and to his ruin. This is a very cryptic statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya. So the Megale Amukot, who was very known for his very, very profound thoughts on Torah, raises a question concerning this Gemara, among many. That, first of all, the Nachash HaKadmoni was a single creature. And Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya opens his remarks by referring to this servant, this single creature. So why does the Gemara conclude by mentioning two serpents? Hayum mizdamnin lo shene nechashim tovim. If he wasn't cursed, then every Jew would have two serpent servants. Echad mishagro letzafon ve'echad mishagro ledarom. One being sent to the north, one being sent to the south. So he explains the following. I'm going to do my best to decipher his words. Yishmael represents the klipa, the contamination and impurity of Abraham's attribute of chesed. He is the negative force of chesed, and that is the klipa of the donkey. And we see that even in Chumash that Yishmael is referred to as a female donkey. Esav represents the contamination and impurity of Yitzchak's attribute of Gevurah, strict judgment. And he is the klipa version of Gevurah known as the klipa of the ox. That is Esav. So Yishmael and Esav. These two klipot, headed by Esav and Yishmael, are appointed to lead over the 70 nations of the world. The ministering angel of Esav stands in charge of 35 nations on the left side of the klipa of Gevurah, and the angel of Yishmael stands in charge of 35 nations of the 70 to the right side of the klipa of chesed. This is why the Torah prohibits one of the 613 mitzvot, one of the negative commandments we have, is lo taharos beshor ubahamor yachdav. That a person is not allowed to plow using an ox and a donkey together. Very simple understanding. It is unfair to the donkey, and it causes the donkey harm because the ox pulls stronger than the donkey. So on a very simple level, that's the reason why you cannot use an ox and a donkey together to plow. But on a deeper spiritual level, what's really happening here is there's a grave danger that exists when these two forces are united, because they are the root of all forces of Tumah contained among the 70 nations of the world. The Magaleh Amukot explains that the Nachash, the original snake, was the root and the embodiment of all evil and all forces of Tumah. And that snake contained these two elements of impurity, that of Ishmael and Esav. And this fact is alluded to in the name Nachash. Nachash actually stands for Nachash, Nun is Nachash, Het is Hamor, and Shin is Shor, a donkey and an ox. When you combine these forces of Tumah, the Nachash was able to succeed in getting Adam and Chava to eat from that tree, to stumble and sin with the Etz Hadat. So now that Adam HaRishon had succumbed to the Nachash's ruse, and now that he sinned, then he was stuck. Had he not do so, he would have been able to overcome these forces of Tumah, the donkey and the ox, which is embodied by the snake. He would have been able to subdue the Nahash with these impure forces and negative klipot, transform them into good. And the evil forces of the world would have no choice but to accept it. Had he accomplished that feat, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would not have prohibited us from plowing an ox and a donkey together. The opposite. We would employ the Nahash, containing these two major forces, for the sake of Kedusha. The Nachash would still possess its two legs, and it would run to serve us. The force of the donkey we would send to the south, the right side representing the attribute of Chesed, to perform kindness on behalf of Hashem, whereas the force of the ox we would deploy to the north, the left side when we face east, representing the attribute of Geburah, to perform acts of severity and restraint in the name of God. So this is what Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya actually means in this Gemara. It's unfortunate that this servant is gone from the world. Had the Nachash continued to exist with both legs, every Jew would have had two good servants. Two, yes. Namely the donkey and the ox at his service within the Nachash. Echad mishagro latzafon, ve'echad mishagro ladarom. The ox would be available to perform tasks for Gevurah to the left, and the donkey to the south to perform tasks related to Chesed. Le'avi lo sandlonim tovim v'avanim tovot margaliot, and not only that, not just to bring precious gems, they will now dig up dirt to bring to his garden and his ruin. What does that mean, dig up dirt? They would have been allowed to work together, the ox and the donkey, in tandem in the fields, to plow. But Adam and Chava failed. They failed to overcome the Nachash. They fell in its trap because of the forces of the donkey and the ox. And not only were these two forces not transformed into good, but they fell into the depths of Tumah, combating any force of Kedusha that we have. They became the root of evil, and that led their ministering angels of the 70 nations of the world to lead the 70 nations of the world. And the commandment not to plow with an ox and a donkey was reinstated. And therefore it is so crucial that these two forces cannot work together because of the danger that they pose and the threat that they pose to Klal Yisrael. We have to keep this pair as separated as much as we can. why did the Egel HaZahav contain half an ox and half a donkey? The Gemara tells us in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Kuf Mem Vav Amud Aleph, that when Bnei Israel drew near Har Sinai, they were able to get rid of the contamination and any klipot, any negative influences that they had. However, due to the Chet HaEgel, that contamination returned as it did before. And in another Gemara, Masechet Avodah Zarah, it says, "Lo kiblu Yisrael et Torah, ela kedei shelo yeh malach hamavet sholet bahem." Israel only received the Torah so that the angel of death would not prevail over them. That was it. There was no more death when the Jewish people accepted the Torah. And it quotes a pasuk. The problem is, "Havaltem ma'asechem achen ke'adam temutun." However, you corrupted your deeds, and therefore, ke'adam temutun, like men you shall die, quoting the pasuk in Tehillim. So what do we see here? What do we see? What could have been had they not performed the Chet HaEgel? There's a similar statement in the Midrash on the pasuk in this week's parasha. "V'amichtav michtav Elohim hu charut ala luchot." And what was written was the writing of God that was engraved on the tablets. Cherut min hagaluyot, cherut mi malach hamavet. Al tikra charut ela cherut. Don't read it engraved, read it freedom. They were free. Free from the exiles and free from the malach hamavet. At the time of Matan Torah, when they had the tablets in hand, that was it. There was no angel of death. They couldn't die. So now the question is, if they were free from the Yetzer Hara, then how did they commit the sin of the Chet HaEgel? If they were free from the Malach HaMavet, the Malach HaMavet is the Satan, is the Yetzer Hara, like we've said many, many times. How did they make the sin? How did they sin with this Chet HaEgel? So the answer is the sin did not come as a result of the Yetzer Hara, because they had no Yetzer Hara. The sin came from an outside influence, otherwise known as the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav were the group of Egyptians that at last minute wanted to join Am Yisrael and leave Paro. And they were the cause of all the problems in the Midbar. Every time you see the word Am, nation, in Sefer Shemot, it's in reference to the Erev Rav. And they were the ones who, of course, were the initiators, protagonists of these of the Chet HaEgel. In fact, the Pasuk writes in Shir HaShirim, which we say every Friday night, Al tiruni she'ani shechar choret. Do not view me with contempt, despite my dark complexion, sheshazafatni hashamesh, because it's a sun which glared upon me. Bene imini harubi, samuni notera et hakeramim, karmi sheli lo natarti. The alien children of my mother incited me and made me a keeper of the vineyards of idols. But the vineyard of my own true God I did not keep. So Rashi says that this pasuk actually refers to the sin of the Chet HaEgel. Bene imini charubi, the alien children of my mother. Hem bene Mitzrayim shegadalti bahem ve'alu imi be'erev rav. These are the Egyptians that I raised and became part of the Erev Rav. They departed Mitzrayim as the Erev Rav. Hem nicharu bi beisatetam upitiyutim. They induced me to worship other gods. And at the same time, I abandoned the God of my fathers. So what do we see? The Chet HaEgel was similar to the Chet of the Etz Hadat. It caused tremendous damage to the world, especially to Bnei Israel. The Chet of the Etz Hadat, when Adam and Chava ate from the tree, introduced the filth of the Nahash into Adam HaRishon, and as a result, the decree of death was imposed on all of mankind. Similar fashion came the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf, and that contamination of filth was returned. And as well, a decree of death returned, because it was all gone. It was going to be no more Malach HaMavet after Jewish people accepted the Torah. So now, try to make sense of what's happening over here. The top half of the Egel was that of an ox, and the bottom half of the Egel was that of a donkey. Had Bnei Israel been able to withstand the influence of the Erev Rav and not been lured into committing the sin of the Chet HaEgel, they would have lived an existence similar to Adam HaRishon before the Chet. the one where Adam had not succumbed to the Nachash and eaten from the Etz Hadat. They would have rectified the world. They would have transformed the two forces of the ox and the donkey into forces for good. Forces that serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu letovah. Yet, with the assistance of the Erev Rav, the Satan was able to succeed in its mission, influencing Bnei Israel to participate in the sin. So the huge chidush, just as the two forces contained within the Nahash, the donkey and the ox, sank into the depths of Tuman, became the source of all evil, the source for all negative powers among the 70 nations of the world, so too the unholy forces of the ox and the donkey were united once again as a result of the Chet HaEgel, and it was half ox and half donkey. And as a result, the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, and the reality of the Galut and the exile among the 70 nations of the world returned. And this is what the Megalei Amukot says. Unbelievable, unbelievable chidush. Let's explain the connection to Shabbat. Why Shabbat observance, as we started in the beginning, constitutes an atonement for the Egel. Says the Bnei Yisachar, the Gemara, he quotes the Gemara Masechet Shabbat Daf Kuf Yudchet. Ilmale shamru Yisrael Shabbat Rishona lo shalta ba'en umah belashon. If Bnei Israel had only kept the first Shabbat, then no nation or people would have ever ruled over them. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, "Vayi bayom hashevi'i," and it was on the seventh day, in reference to the man. When the man came down, Yaseu min ha'am lilkot. Men went out, Erev Rav, went out to collect the man, even though they were commanded not to. Bekatuv batre, uktiv batre, and it's written right afterwards, Vayavo Amalek. Comes Amalek and waged war. What's a connection between the observance of the first Shabbat and the reign of the nations of the world over Israel? So says the Bnei Yisachar, a wonderful, wonderful explanation based on the Megalei Amukot that we said. If you go back to the famous Brit Ben Abetarim by Abraham Avinu, where Hashem made this pact with Abraham that although his children will be enslaved in a foreign nation for 400 years, but he will receive Eretz Yisrael in return and have descendants like the Cholayam, like the sand of the sea and the stars. The pasuk says, "Vayikach lo et kol ele vaybater otam batavech." He took all the animals that he needed and he split them in the center. Vaybater otam batavech. There are 70 guardian angels above, says the Bnei Yisachar, and these angels, we said, are split into two groups. 35 on the left side, that is represented by the evil Malach Samech Mem Aleph Lamed, and that's the guardian angel of Esav. And opposite them is 35 guardian angels on the right side of Kedusha, led by the guardian angel of Yishmael, which is Reish Hei Bet. And we have 70 guardian angels. Ele opposite Ele. Ele is 36 in fact, we'll see why, but it's 35 opposite 35. We have Lamed Hei, 35 nations on the right with their leader, their guardian angel, the one on the right that's Reish Hei Bet. So that's Lamed Hei and the Aleph. Opposite 35 nations, another Ele on the left, which is Samech Mem Aleph Lamed, the angel of Esav, leading the 35. And that's the allusion to this pasuk. Vayikach lo et kol ele. That he took two sets of ele, comprising the two halves of the 35. Vayvater otam batavech. And he split them in two halves. And he placed Bnei Israel in between. Ele barechev ve'ele basusim. As David HaMelech says in Tehillim. Two Eles are fighting. Two sets of Goyim, when we mention the Goyim fighting. Some are in the Rechev, the chariot, some by the Susim, the horses. That represents the 70 nations. But us, we're in the middle. V'anachnu, b'shem Adonai Eloheinu naskir. We are smack in the middle. We refer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in times of need. Says the Megillah Amukot, an unbelievable insight again. And he says that this division between the nations explains why Am Yisrael, their holy day of the week is the day of Shabbat. In contrast to Muslims, the descendants of Ishmael, they celebrate their day on Friday. Friday is to the right of Shabbat. Whereas the holy day of the Christians, they celebrate Sunday, which is to the left of Shabbat. The Christians are descendants of Esav, Muslims are descendants of Ishmael. And once again, Bnei Israel have Shabbat Kodesh. Bnei Israel is a central position. They were allotted Shabbat Kodesh to sanctify and to cherish. V'niktashti betoch Bnei Israel. And I shall be sanctified among Bnei Israel. And the pasuk specifically employs this pasuk of betoch, alluding to the fact that Bnei Israel stands in the middle of Esav and Ishmael. Those are the words of the Megillah Amukot. So we see that the sanctity of Shabbat, which is located between the other holy days of the other nations, nullifies the klipot of Ishmael and Esav, which are positioned to the right and to the left of the realm of the Kedusha, and those are in charge of the 70 nations. So that's how the Bnei Yissaschar explains this statement of Hazal. If Bnei Israel had only kept that first Shabbat, no nation or people would have been able to rule over them. Had they kept the first Shabbat, they would have nullified the forces of Esav and Ishmael, which are positioned to the right and to the left of Shabbat Kodesh, who represent the 70 nations of our Galut. No nation would have been able to come and rule over Bnei Israel. Not only that, we can also explain why Shabbat Kodesh occupies the middle position between Ishmael and Esav. Shabbat Kodesh is like the curtain, the iron curtain that prevents them from joining forces, like we said. We can't have Esav and Ishmael join. You can't have the ox and the donkey come together and plow together, because the danger involved is critical to Am Yisrael. The Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin says, "Pizur lareshaim hanaa lahem v'hanaa leolam." The separation, the dispersal of the wicked is a benefit to them and beneficial to the world. When you separate the forces of evil, the power of Kedusha, the power of Bnei Israel are able to overcome the negative forces. And that's the meaning of the mitzvah, lo tacharosh b'shor u'b'chamor. Don't use the force of the ox and the donkey together. How do you do so? Through Shabbat. Shabbat acts as that iron curtain. And what do we recite every single Shabbat? Mizmor shir leyom HaShabbat, tov leodot. This is the sweet Mizmor that is so dear to our hearts, which is based entirely on for the praise of a Kedusha on Shabbat day. There in Tehillim it is written, Ki hine oyevecha Adonai, ki hine oyevecha yovedu, yitparedu kol po'ale aven. Why is there a repetition? Ki hine oyevecha Adonai, ki hine oyevecha yovedu. Ki hine oyevecha Adonai, for behold your enemies Hashem. David HaMelech is teaching us an important lesson concerning the power of Shabbat and the ability to separate those two enemies of God, Ishmael and Esav. The 35 on the right side under the Klipah of Ishmael, and the 35 on the left side under the Klipah of Esav. Ki hineh oyevecha Hashem, for behold your enemies Hashem, is referring to the 35 nations on the right side led by Ishmael, and has the Rashi Tevot of Ki hineh oyevecha Hashem totals 35 plus the Aleph. The Ele 35 Haki, Kaf is 20, Hey is 5, 25, Aleph is 26, and Yud 36. 35 plus the 1. Ki hineh oyevecha yovedu. Again, ki hineh oyevecha yovedu. The same 4 letters. 35 plus the 1. Those are represented by the forces of Esav on the left side. Concerning both of these forces, he states, Yitparedu kol po'ale aven. All evildoers shall be dispersed. Separate them. Yitpared me'alai. Get away. Due to the power of Shabbat that is standing between them, That's the force of Shabbat. They will be separated and eliminated. Now we have a much better understanding, Rabotai, as to why the Shabbat observance serves as atonement for the Chet HaEgel during the unfortunate situation and constructing of the Chet HaEgel. These two forces of Tum'ah joined together. Esav's klipa of the ox and Yishmael's klipa of the donkey. And for that reason, the Egel took a dual form, half ox and half donkey. But by observing the Shabbat, we effectively separate between those two evil, corrupt forces, between Yishmael's klipa of the donkey on the right, Esav's klipa of the ox on the left. Yitparedu kol po'al le'aven. And according to many Chachamim, who wrote that Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat? Adam HaRishon. Adam HaRishon, when he observed the first Shabbat, because Adam HaRishon had the ability to defeat the Nahash, which contained the two forces. It had the two legs, the forces of Ishmael and Esav, the ox and the donkey within it. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to do so. So he composed this Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat as a tikkun, teaching the rest of Klal Yisrael and the generations to come. David HaMelech being the Gilgul of Adam HaRishon. You have a job to do. You have to observe the Shabbat. The parashiot of Shabbat come before the parasha of the Chet HaEgel. That's a tikkun. Yitparedu kol po'al le'aven. And that's our job and our mission. B'ezrat Hashem, we should be zocheh to eliminate all evil from this world through our consistent efforts in performing Torah mitzvot, very specifically Shabbat. And one day when we zocheh again to celebrate Beyachad, to give the Mahatzit Shekel one more time, donated to the Bet HaMikdash, all that it has to do, all the power that's involved in that mitzvah, and we will one day celebrate Beyachad. Amen. Kin Yiratzon with the coming of Mashiach. Wishing everybody a wonderful night. Be well.